Good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, 30th of April 2020, and I want to tell you that Ramadan Kareem, and I hope that everybody is in a good health and you are stay safe at home. Let's start our story about Helen Keller, and today we will continue reading the text about Helen Keller, and this picture is for the real Helen Keller. Okay, let's start. As usual, and as I told you for this 2 weeks, we were reading see and say the words, our sight words, and I told you two things about seeing and how to read our sight words. As I told you before, you should read it one by one like the girl in the picture. If you want to see the video, you will have it in my PT. You can use it and see the whole videos. Okay, a child sees the word on the flashcard and says the word while underlining it with her finger. Why? Because she wants to memorize the words. The first word with me today is show, and sorry for not giving you pictures with the words, but I tried one time like that and one time like this. Show. Six. Repeat after me. Six. And they are so easy. Small, small, small. Start, start, start. 10, 10, 10. I believe that those words are so easy. I want to remind you with author's purpose and what's meant by author's purpose. Author purpose is to persuade, to convince people about his story, to inform people information about something, to entertain them and give them fun. As I told you before, we have learned two things from our story. One for the author purpose and the other for the summary. Today, our learning outcomes are: I can identify author's purpose. I can summarize what has been read. I can use information in text to make a summary. Okay, let's open our book, our reading book. I want you to open page 484 and 485. And I want to tell you, for your information, if you remember our genre for our story, it was biography. And we said that biography is that we are learning something about someone's life. Okay, so here one day, Helen and Annie walked to the well house, and this is the well. This is the well. Someone was pumping water. Annie pushed Helen's hand. So Annie Sullivan was pumping the well. This is the well, a place or something gets out water. Okay, and on the other hand, we have Helen. She was playing with the water. Helen felt the cool water on one hand. She felt her teacher's fingers spelling. Her teacher was spelling what? W-A-T-E-R, water, into her other hand. So by one hand, she was putting her hand on the water. On the other hand, she was taking her hand and make her learning the words by using the fingers. Over and over, Annie spelled the word. Suddenly, Helen stood very still. All at once, she understood. The liquid flowing over her hand had a name. It was water. It was what? It was water. Everything had a name. Helen wanted to learn them all. So from this point, Helen started to learn the names of everything around her. She knows the first word that she knows. It was the word water. Everything, she started to know it one by one. Then the second word, it was the word teacher. Annie spelled the name of everything. Helen touched Then Helen turned and pointed to Annie. Teacher spelled Annie from then on. Helen's name for Annie was teacher. That summer, Helen learned a lot of new words. She stopped using her old motions. Her fingers gave her all the words she needed. From this point, she started to know everything. Can you turn out the page? Annie, open page 486 and 487. Annie didn't teach Helen words one at a time. She talked to her in full sentences. That way, Helen learned more than just new words. She learned new ideas. From that day, her personality changed a lot from a weak child who was kicking, screaming, shouting, crying the whole day to another person, more civilized. She became good person, trying to be adult. She tried to know everything about her family and around her. She tried to know words and sentences, and from that time she talked to her in full sentences. That way, Helen learned more than just new words. She learned new ideas. Helen and Annie took long walks through the woods and along the river. Annie gave Helen lessons on the walks. She showed Helen how seeds sprout and plants grow. She made mountains out of mud and taught Helen about volcanoes. Sometimes they climbed a tree and had a lesson there. I want you to see something in this part. In this page, Helen, she is reading a book in Braille. What's the meaning of Braille? Braille is a way of reading for blind people. It's like dots, dots, dots. We have a lot of dots. She is counting the dots and she started to read the book. Helen was hungry for knowledge. She wants to know a lot. She wanted to learn everything Annie could teach her. Soon Annie started teaching Helen how to read. The words were printed in raised letters for a blind person. Helen felt the words with her fingers. She liked to hunt for words she knew. When she learned to read better, she read her books over and over. Her curious fingers were down the raised letters. So the author purpose here, he wants us to know that Helen is a good person. She changed a lot. She is hungry for knowledge. She wants to know everything around her. And the people who wants to know everything is curious, as we said before. Helen also learned to write. She wrote letters to her family and Dr. Bell. Who was Dr. Bell, if you remember? Yes, Dr. Graham Bell. She wrote many letters and she started to be an educator. She went to the college and she was amazing. Mr. Angus was amazed by how much Helen had learned. He published some of Helen's letters. Reports began to write about Helen. Soon she was famous. People all over the world wanted to know about the miracle girl. From this day, they named her what? The Miracle Girl. And Helen wanted to know all about the world. This was our story. I want you to learn more. Here, number one, what, and now it's time for our questions. What is the most important thing that happened because of Helen's experience at the water pump? In the water pump, she learned to communicate with words. And the first word she talked and pronounced, it was the word water. Here, our second question, which details help you to know this? Helen understood that everything had a name and she learned many new words and stopped using motion. From this time, she learned how to speak. So she stopped to use her fingers and motion and start to be more educated and speak very well. Suppose you looked at the picture on page 486, go back to it, without reading the caption. What might you think is happening? We can go back to page 486. Look at here. If you don't know nothing and you didn't read this part, that Helen and Annie having a lesson, what you would think about? I will think that they are reading about a tree. Okay, question number 2. How do the captions help us? It helps us. They tell exactly what is being shown. The caption, if you remember, captions means the writing under the pictures. How do we know that Helen read her books many times? Helen wanted to learn, and he said that she was curious to read. What is the author showing us about Helen's feeling toward learning? The author says that she read her books so many times that she wore down the raised letters. Helen couldn't see or hear, but she was able to read and write and learn about the world. Okay? This was the question. Why did people call Helen? If you remember, we said that from this day she called her the miracle girl. The miracle girl, that it means why they named her like this, because she was able to read and write and learn everything, and she was deaf and she was blind. Deaf means she can't hear, blind means she can see. Were people right to admire Helen? Yes, of course, because she was uh, an extraordinary girl. She can do everything. Why do you think so? Because Helen was exceptional, because she could do some things better than people who had all their senses. I want you to know more about Helen, so I want to ask you some sort of things about this picture. What were some of Helen's Keller's challenges as a young girl? Her challenge was that she couldn't see and she couldn't hear, and her challenge to speak, how she could speak without seeing and hearing. Do you think, how did Helen Keller see the world? She was seeing the world from her fingers and from her touching. In this picture, we were talking about Mrs. Annie Sullivan. Who was she? I want you to tell me your answers. Here, Mrs. Annie Sullivan was her teacher, and she taught Helen how to read and how to write. So she was her teacher, and here she was teaching Annie how to speak and behave well. Can we go to the next page? In this picture, what did Helen discover when she and Annie were at Well House? She started to speak. She started to speak and read. How did Helen learn to talk? By her fingers. If you remember, Mrs. Annie Sullivan, she tried to, using her fingers, to spell the letters. Do you remember? On the last page, how did Helen learn to do besides spell the words? She started her life by reading and writing with Braille part. How did this change her life? She became an educator. She went to the college. She became very famous because she was the miracle girl. She can't see and she can't hear, but she can speak and she can teach others a lot of things. I want to tell you some sort of information about Annie Sullivan. Annie Sullivan stayed at the family home and began teaching Helen how to finger spell. And I told you that she was taking her fingers and she helped her from her angry and frustration to become a very good person. And when she started by teaching her word, the first word for her, it was water. She took Helen outside and placed her hand under the spout of the water pump while water ran into Helen's hand. Annie spelled out the letters water on her other hand. So this was the first moment that Helen Keller started to know everything. Also, I want to speak about her graduation. This is the picture for Helen Keller. At this point in her life, Helen was confident at communicating in many ways, such as speaking, typing finger, and spelling Braille type. Also, she was in the college. She started to write her book about her life. Helen graduated from college when she was 24. She was the first deaf and blind person to achieve a college degree. Also, Annie continued to be Helen's guide and teacher. After helping others, she started to think, Helen, that she needed to become a member of American Federation for the Blind People. She started to take money and raising money for helping the blind people during her life. And she also supported many other causes, including demanding the right to vote for women. And this is her picture before she is dying. Her work took her all over the world. At age of 75, she set out of a challenging track across Asia, which took her 5 months to complete, and she did this to inspire others like her. Also, Helen died in 1968 at the age of 87, and she was, during her life, she was given many awards for recognizing how she fought to overcome her disability. I told you before, disability means that she can't do something, and disabled people who can't, disability here, maybe they can't see, they can't hear, they can't walk. Her life story has been made into a television drama and play. So now we finished everything. I hope that it was clear. I want all of you to study. And for me, Helen Keller, she was an inspiring story. She gave me the challenge to study more and more. I hope that it will give you more challenge like me. I want you to, if you don't understand anything, you can tell me. Please use our Marzano chart. If you don't understand, just give me 1. If you need to help, give me 2. If you got it, give me 3. And thank you for your support. And goodbye, my dear students. See you tomorrow in another class.